Hi.
Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Kevin Gentle, member of the States of Alderney and chairman of the Building and Development Control Committee. Today, we're going to take a look at the land use plan and the island strategic plan. Kevin, good to see you. Thank you for sparing me some time.
Thank you very much, Tony, and good to see you too. I hope you're well, and thanks for having me on.
That's good. Now, of course, the big thing that's coming up from your point of view is the land use plan, which has to be reviewed every 5 years.
Yes, it's a statutory requirement in law. Section 24 is a part that says that the law is the Building Development Control Law, and Section 24 is the part that says we have to do a land use plan every 5 years, and Section 25 is the bit that determines that we have to review it at least once within the 5 years before the expiration of the current plan. But going forward, if BDCC, that's the Building Development Control Committee, is advised or is of the view that moving to possibly a longer time frame is something that should be considered, then we have the power to have an ordinance drafted to extend that period. By that, I mean, for example, if we were to discover that the proposed cost of a review were astronomical, then the mechanism exists for bringing the ordinance, but we still have to start it because the law says so, we're legally bound. We can resolve to delay completion by 12, 18 months, however long, for example, which would have the effect of spreading the cost over a longer time period, and then change, as I said, the aforementioned Section 24. I'm sorry to anyone watching this being confused by law references, moving to something like a 10-year plan, for example, which is like Guernsey. But we can't not do the review. It's the litigation risk is very high. The reputational risk exists. So yes, you know, we have to do a land use plan.
You're in a situation where you've got to do it. Have you appointed advisors this time round? Because you used Arup last time, didn't you?
We used Arup last time. We've got Arup doing the initial scoping cost work. The civil service and the Treasury will take those figures and reporting back to us later. But we need advisor input. It's paramount. You know, we don't have the resources here on Ireland to deal with a lot of the nitty-gritty background stuff, unfortunately. So at present, Arup are doing the scoping. Yeah,
but as far as Arup were concerned, it was a pretty comprehensive setup last time round, wasn't it? You know, it gave you a pretty good framework for going forward. So presumably this time round, it's going to be more a question of sort of looking at any little bits and pieces that need looking at rather than, you know, a major change. I'm going to come to what I consider a major change a bit later on, but anyway, how much these things cost, Kevin? I mean, they're not cheap, are they?
The last one cost, it's eye-watering. The last one cost, I think it was 273,000 for the phase 2 part, but they've done some phase 1 work back in 2015, 2016, which the initial stuff, which was another 150,000. So do the maths, they're not cheap, or it wasn't cheap initially. Like you say, hopefully the review will not be as expensive. But it's almost like we have our hands tied. We have such a good plan in place. I mean, there are little bits that need sorting out. Now we've got it, we have to keep it.
Is there a way in which you can avoid public inquiries? I mean, I'm thinking here there are a couple of things that are on the agenda that might crop up in the next few years. First of all, the lengthening of the runway, and secondly, the granting of permission for a marina. Are you able, as chairman, to sort of say to the advisors, well, look, perhaps we need to sort of put these in so that essentially you can avoid a costly public inquiry at a later stage?
Okay, we'll talk about the runway part first, and I understand you want to speak about the runway again in a little bit later. But if for example, presently in the land use plan, the runway extension is to the east, which is for people who aren't quite sure which way that is, it's the bit that faces the lighthouse.
Yes, okay.
The proposed runway extension is to the west,
Yep.
which is the other end of the runway. So that's not catered for in the land use plan presently. It's in the designated area. I think there's various landowners up there. So if, for example, the people wanting to do it waited for the land use plan to come out, they'd have to wait for the call for sites as part of the process. The land use plan would not take effect until March next year, March 23. So we're looking at 12, 13 months away, which would mean that no work could start until that point at least.
Yeah.
So a land use plan inspected inquiry would be required if they wanted to start work tomorrow. Okay, so forgive me, I'm having to read this a little bit. Because it would be deemed a major project, right? And it's located partially or entirely within the designated area. Where BDCC will consider a grant of planning permission because the states of Alderney have resolved that the development is of strategic importance.
Yeah. The
committee bound to request that a planning application inquiry is held. So during the pre-application and determination stages, and as the information emerges, the planning office may advise the applicant, whoever that is, the states of Guernsey, whether we would be disposed to approve the application or not. And I think we'd say yes, but we would have to request the president, as it stands at the moment, to appoint an inspector to hold that inquiry. Now, an inquiry under major project is a reasonable option for something like the runway, because, as I said, the input into the call for sites procedure would take longer time. And the same applies to anything down the other end of the island at the harbour. Yeah. You know, if someone turned up the marina proposal tomorrow. So the issue of pursuing the necessary planning permissions, right, including the amendments to the land use plan going forward, has been raised, and civil service discussions are underway and taking place on how best to address this. So they are aware that it's not fait accompli.
Yeah, okay. Now, the one thing that I think Arup missed out on last time round was a sensible planning appeals procedure, which we still haven't got. And am I right in thinking that if an applicant puts in an application to you, you reject it, their only course of action is to take it to the Alderney court, and it goes before some jurats who are not planning professionals? You know, anywhere else in the world, I think it would go before a planning inspector who would be neutral and would be able to sort of look at the thing and not have any pressure from any side of the community to say yay or nay on it.
I think you've just read what I've got written in front of me. I mean, yes, it has long been accepted as a fundamental principle in law that any applicant who's aggrieved by a refusal of my committee, BDCC, to grant permission, should be able to have the decision reviewed, potentially overturned. But like I say, at the moment, the only recourse is to the Alderney court. Now, there's no doubt that the court provides independence from us as politicians, the political body. Yeah. But they also provide a good measure of objectivity. But it's very formal, it's usually expensive, legal professionals, legal correctness. And as a general rule, planning matters are, by their very nature, just matters of judgment and interpretation of the policies. And it's never really a simple binary choice. So most developed jurisdictions in the world have a process to enable people to challenge that without having to go to court. For example, in Guernsey, an unsuccessful applicant can lodge an appeal with an independent planning panel,
Yeah.
which is made up of 3 people. I mean, there's plenty more on the panel itself, but they use 3 people, and one of them is a professional in planning matters and will preside over it. Their decision is final. Now, the cost and in time and effort and resources of taking a civil matter through the court places it out of reach of all but those who are very wealthy or those who are determined to see it through to the end. Because decisions of BDCC are made in good faith, based on the available advice, understanding of the planning policies, right? But in answer to your question, well, I think I'm getting to the answer to your question. Inquiries have been made with the Secretary of Guernsey Planning Appeals, which includes an ordinary resident. And the view is that the panel could also sit as an ordinary planning appeals panel at minimal additional cost, because you don't get anything for free these days.
No, of course not.
No, because the administrative support for such sittings would have to be provided by Alderney, but that's not seen as a problem because the court office already do the work, compiling the information packs, etc., for whenever an appeal is launched. So we have approached Guernsey, discussion taking place, and BDCC only last week resolved to take this further. So it's not going to be an overnight thing. The law will need, an ordinance will need to be drafted, and knowing that politics moves at the speed of a glacier these days, it could take a while, but it will be a way of moving away from people like Mr. LeBlanc's been refused permission. You can go to the planning appeals panel as opposed to going to see the local juror. So
that's got to make a lot of sense.
It has. We're not too keen on third-party appeals because, for example, Mr. LeBlanc wants to build something and Mrs. Smith out by the lighthouse objects. It could be frivolous, vexatious, and unless we can weed these things out, they're not going to happen. So we're against third-party appeals, but certainly the aggrieved.
But you've already got a model operating in Guernsey, and it makes a lot of sense to piggyback on it, doesn't it?
Well, they keep telling us we're working together.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's get on to new dwellings. At the present time, you don't have the power to insist on energy ratings, do you?
Well, not as a committee, but energy ratings are covered in building regulations. They cover conservation of fuel and power and set the minimum requirements for both new and renovation work. And they include a thing called U values. Now, a U value is something that it's a measure of how something will hold either the heating or the cool air. Right. And the lower the number you see quoted, the better it is. So 0.1 is excellent, very low heat loss. 1.1 is, you need to get something sorted. There's something wrong with that. Now, for example, 100 millimeters of insulation in the loft gives a value of about 0.14, which is well under the approved standard. So if everybody was to insulate their loft, they would be ticking the boxes. And the building regs also covers walls, roofs, floors, windows, doors, even boiler efficiencies. And this is all found in Guernsey technical standards list, but that's done through building regs, not BDCC.
Okay, but having said that, the ratings surely need to appear in the form of some sort of certificate, don't they?
I'm sorry, I can't even answer the question. I don't know this. It's as planning goes. Someone applies for permission to build a house, we say yes. It's not for us to determine what they actually do once they start building it. That's a building regs matter, which is governed by the building regs here are governed by Guernsey.
But we're all sort of very aware of the need to adopt decarbonisation. And obviously, if government has the ability to say to anyone wanting to develop, look, it's got to be within these parameters, then, that sort of adds a bit of weight. And I would have thought that if you're going to sell a house, for example, a new house, if you've got an energy certificate to actually show to the purchaser, that's probably going to give you the edge on your property as opposed to somebody that hasn't got an energy certificate.
Well, what I'm doing now is I'm making a note of that as something to inquire about and take forward, because it's something that I haven't thought about.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that someone else hasn't thought about it, but if you've thought about it, I doubt you're the only person.
Well, I know
so that's something I can take to the committee.
we see a lot of Scott frames going up on the island, and they are prepared to give you an energy rating certificate once the place is built. So, something to consider there. Let's get on to housing now, Kevin, because the fact of the matter is that the states have no financial assets to offer, but they do have some surplus land that could possibly develop into Bankwage 2. And Bankwage 1 was a really good scheme, wasn't it?
I'm sitting in one of them now.
Right.
Yeah, fantastic. It's a shame it ever stopped.
Yeah.
But if yes, the states have land, if they could make that available for the purpose of, as you say, Bankwage 2, then that's all well and good. But we need to do a review of the state's assets, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you exactly how much land we have or how much land we haven't got and what is suitable for building and where it falls in the land use plan.
Yeah, quite.
We might own something and discover it's on the edge of a cliff. But the housing, the correct title, Housing Action Group or the Housing Group, I'm not sure of the actual title, are looking at many strands feeding into this, and hopefully come back with something sooner rather than later.
Yeah, because it is a big problem, isn't it, in terms of low-cost housing, and it's become a bigger problem over the last year or so because prices seem to have surged quite considerably. And it just seems to me that Bankwage 1 was a great idea. I suppose its one failure was the fact the states couldn't buy the properties back as the owners wanted to sell them on. That was the original concept, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, what happened, so we've got the situation where residents build properties.
Yeah.
When that self-build property, like for example, this house I'm sitting in now,
yeah,
if I was to sell it tomorrow, especially with the market going through the roof, and for anyone watching, no, it's not for sale. It's unlikely to be affordable as a starter home for the next generation of first-time buyers.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it?
Because what happened was everybody who built a house, whether it was on the Bankwage or it was a private thing up the hill, we all built the same house, right? In the sense of it was the biggest and best we could afford. It was a lifetime family home. We had no idea or no reason to build it to sell. I don't think anyone saw COVID coming along, because except for, and we've never had the developer here, so except for something like a major building project on the Grand site, there are no constraints on the amount for which somebody can, or which a firm can sell a new build property. And there's no constraint either as to what type of property can be built. Now, the need for affordable housing is paramount. Should there be a presumption that all new residential buildings be high quality, low cost accommodation? Because we need sufficient housing to meet the states of Alderney's aspirations to grow the population. And that housing need is required to create and maintain the sustainable and diverse population. So maybe it's a case of Alderney needs to look at the way housing support is provided. It should be reviewed and revised as necessary, because I think we need to possibly think more broadly on the topic of affordable housing. That term has almost got built-in assumptions that additional housing needs to be built so that young people from local families can afford to stay on the island, or key workers on lower wages can actually move here. Because Alderney's social housing, forgive the noise, it's the coffee machine.
Okay. I'll come down later.
Switches itself off. It cuts out about 5 minutes after you used it. Because as far as I can work out, Alderney's social housing is intended to support those islanders who can't afford the open market housing. And there's a lot of them out there, especially younger people in lower paid occupations, or those returning after training or education or a short time contract off the island. Because we have to remember, a home is the most expensive thing someone will ever buy.
Yeah.
I can't think of many people who are going to buy anything more expensive. But it's also unrealistic to expect that the first home will be a big detached property or a huge bungalow. We don't want. It's almost like occasionally people think, well, I want mum and dad's house today.
Yeah.
And because there's no housing churn here. So for those of us from the UK, we bought the 2 up, 2 down, and moved on up the ladder, got our foot on the ladder, and then moved up slowly as we went. And then children come along, you need another bedroom, and then the children leave, and you go back down the scale. But the housing churn never happened here, because like I said, there's never been the developer. It's always been the individual. So it's very much a conundrum. I mean,
should the housing association be doing more in that respect? I mean, presumably they create a surplus each year out of the rents they collect against the cost of maintaining the existing properties.
Yeah, but the housing association, as far as I'm aware, is a not-for-profit organisation. In the sense of what they take in, they will push back out again. They might not be taking enough in rent for, pick a particular property. Property A might get them £7,000, but it needs £9,000 worth of work doing, because presently the states act as guarantors for any loans they want.
Yeah.
So I think the AHA are doing the best they can, but there's still something not quite. There's something missing, and I don't know what it is.
But it's not just Alderney. You go around the UK, you've still got these same problems with affordable housing and the fact that, you know, the population deserve to have reasonable housing and can't get it. But there we are. Can we now go on to the harbour redevelopment? Because the states have got out this request, haven't they, for expressions of interest in coming up with some ideas to redevelop the harbour area. That's separate, of course, from any marina that's likely to take place at some later stage. How do you see that?
Well, looking at it from a planning perspective, it's planning is the end of the line always. So if somebody comes along, if somebody applies under the expression of interest thing, and they come along with an idea for this, and this, only then will we on BDCC get involved, because we're a policy-driven committee, so we use the land use plan, right? Now, Bray Harbour is an opportunity area, so that, I mean, I know you said doesn't include the marina, but the marina falls into the whole of the Bray opportunity area.
Yeah.
But that's the harbour development process is, I must confess, is nothing to do with me. I'm not party to it. I don't know if anyone's applied or if they've got a pile of applications. I have no idea. But
Is it an area though that you think is capable of redevelopment? You know, this comment from you is going to be effectively off the record. Okay. A personal comment rather than a comment as chair of BDCT.
Do I think it's fit for redevelopment?
Well, no. Do you think there are opportunities for redevelopment there?
Yeah,
No,
but
I can't see what you put in. Yeah, but I can't see what you'd actually put in to improve it, other than to extend the quay. I mean, that's now a problem, isn't it?
Well, we're looking at it from somewhere else. We also have the future problem of the fuel delivery boat.
Yep.
When that disappears, you know, springs a leak and goes to the bottom of the Russell, and Guernsey decides that the only way they're going to get fuel is on the massive thing and pump it ashore from 3 miles out.
Yeah.
You know, how do we get there? Do we go down the Isotainer route, or do we go for the big pipe work that you see around harbours so they can sit out?
Yeah, sit out in the actual harbour itself and discharge. Yeah.
Yeah. But that sort of work's going to cost them hundreds of millions.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know where that's coming from.
Well, this is the problem, and you know, let's move off the land use plan and the planning situation, and get on to the island strategic plan, which is one of many, I believe.
Yeah, like buses.
Absolutely. But you and I are agreed that connectivity is the key to the success of Alderney's future.
I think it was at the hustings last time, I think, where somebody asked me for my top 3 things for the island, and I said connectivity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be top of everybody's list.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have to maintain it, you know,
but
if not improve it.
I mean, it's a great idea to extend the runway, but you know, having spoken to David Earl about this on one of the previous shows, you know, he thinks that it could cost 50 million. And I think I sent you an article from a guy from the Guernsey Press that was talking 50 to 80 million. And if you work on 50 million as you know, the actual result, that works out to £25,000 per head of population on Alderney, which I don't think is sustainable. We end up with 2 planes a day. It's a white elephant.
Right, okay. The outline business case for a possible runway extension is nearing completion. Now, Alderney has confirmed that they can operate the ATR on a 23-metre wide runway with the same crosswind restrictions as the Dornier, right? But notwithstanding that, I think the company's called ACOM. I don't know what the acronym stands for. They've been asked to supply ballpark costings for both 23 or 30-metre wide runway. I'm not sure that we're going to get a 30-metre wide runway, because that's an extra, it's 7 metres wider, over 1,000 meters. That's 7,000 square meters of extra tarmac that someone would have to pay for. Particularly when Alderney said, well, we can do it on a 23-meter runway. But the political timeline in Guernsey for progressing it depends on which option STSB is recommending. And only yesterday in the Guernsey press, Mark Hellier, the P&R deputy and the Treasury lead and big supporter of Alderney, he's got a house here, wrote a letter basically sort of rebutting Richard Dygard's article.
Yeah.
because he said he's responsible for a lot of things, but rehabilitating the runway is not one of them. It's being developed by STSB. CAA have nothing to do with it. They will oversight the licensing, but operation is a matter for STSB and the ports, not him personally or PNR. Now, the project team involved with this possible extension, they remain acutely aware of the need to arrange public engagement here in Alderney for drop-in sessions, effective media presentations and briefings, so on and so forth. Right? But while the research is taking longer than originally anticipated, the fact that it will have been properly concluded at the end should really reassure states members here, and after that, the wider public, that all complex aspects have been looked at. So to speculate on costs, 50 million, 80 million, whatever, right, using layman's figures, I personally think is unhelpful, especially when we are so close to establishing the true facts. When we get the numbers, then we can say, yeah, that's not right, or actually that's better than anyone's thought. Because, as I said, you mentioned connectivity, the island's lifeline links are, well, they're absolutely critical to future social, economic well-being of Alderney.
Yeah.
And I would take this opportunity to say to anybody watching that I would encourage all islanders to take the opportunity to attend one of these sessions when they get announced, and they're not going to be far away, to learn for themselves what the options mean, ask the questions, and whatever. As for the 2 flights, well, until Alderney give us a proposed timetable, we can't question. I mean, 2 flights, 4 flights, 3 flights, who knows? I have no idea. I think the only problem I can see, and this might be a nothing problem, is if the first flight from Guernsey is an ATR, right? So it flies from Guernsey to here, then here to Southampton. Yeah. Right. It's going to have to fly not full. It can't have 72 seats.
No, that's
There's
right.
no point coming here.
That's right.
Right. So do they fly with only a load of 50 on there to allow the 20 people that might want to get on here to go to Southampton, right? And then how economic is it for an ATR to fly half full? I don't know these things. But until, I can't say his surname, Nico from Alderney,
the CEO.
Till they come out with a proposed timetable. This is how we're going to fill the day. I think, to use a cliche pun, is up in the air.
I suppose I've got to forgive you for that one, have I? But, you know, the fact of the matter is that you need so many bottoms on seats to make flights viable. And, you know, sorry, I just don't see it. I really don't. But
well, I appreciate that, but I'm just going to wait until.
Yeah, okay. I will be interested to see what they ultimately come up with. But you know, to actually sort of design something around the airline's requirements wouldn't take place anywhere else in the world. If BA said to London Heathrow, "We want you to do this, that, and the other," London Heathrow would say, "No. We are the airport operator, and you are an airline, and it's down to you to survive financially on a separate basis." But there we are. Getting a bit tight on time, so some of the questions that I was going to ask you, we're going to have to either flash through very, very quickly. Ferry, are these people backmen still interested in a triangular Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney arrangement?
I'm aware you asked this question, so I checked it out, right? Yeah. And this is the stock answer I'm going to give you. This is commercially sensitive, presently, as the tender process is still live and active. I understand that recommendations are coming from economic development to PNF, I think next week.
Okay. That's enough. They haven't dropped out. That's enough. They haven't dropped out. What about improved broadband? Do you see us getting anything better on that department?
I actually think our broadband is. I think our I can occasionally have calls with someone in Southampton.
Yeah.
Our broadband is better than his there.
Right.
But can we lump that in with connectivity and say yes, we'll improve it?
Yeah. Well, it is important.
Connectivity.
Let's just now skip right through to tax reforms, because we've all received a leaflet in the last few days from Guernsey talking about the fact that they are probably going to introduce GST, which I think is going to create higher inflation. I don't really see them doing the old 3% health tax thing. They've given three options, and I suppose it's probably the one in the middle that they're settled for. It's going to put an awful lot of additional work on companies over here, isn't it, in terms of having to operate the equivalent of a VAT system?
Well, personally, looking at the three, I prefer option 3. But the tax system that's underpinned the international competitiveness of the bailiwick for however long is set to be axed under the instructions of the new US president.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, 0.10 sees most companies pay 0 corporation tax, financial institutions pay 10%. I've got it written down. I'll try to find where I've written it. There is the idea of a 5% GST increase. They changed the import threshold from £240 to 135. I must say, before we go any further, I'm not in favour of GST.
No.
Put a higher registration threshold in 300,000. You mentioned inflation. Indirect taxes like GST make the distribution of the income more unequal. The poor will get taxed a higher proportion of their income than the rich. It's regressive.
Yeah.
A direct tax like income tax can help control inflation. Yeah. Because when inflation is rising, governments have the power to raise or lower the tax rate. When it increases, the consumption demand decreases, and in turn, it helps reduce the inflation. Now, Guernsey has to determine as to whether inflation and unemployment are considered the most important objectives of their economic policy. I don't know if they have or not, because imposing a GST will curb the overall demand for goods and services.
Yep.
Now, if we can reduce or peg income tax in favour of having GST, it will only increase the tax burden on those, I say, at the lower end of the scale. But at the same time, if you have a GST, everybody contributes. It cannot be evaded. But there are things that we would need to get exemptions for. We can't have it on fuel, for example. Yeah. By fuel, I mean heating oil, right? Because our electricity, our oil is already expensive. So we'd have to get exemptions for certain things. Now, I know the Guernsey states had their tax review green paper back in, I think it was October. Yeah. They told P&R to engage further, which is why we've all had something come through the letterbox. It's the PR offensive. I mean, how much does it cost? It's not done for free, is it?
Of course not.
But the technical details of GST certainly need addressing. There are politicians in Guernsey who are against it. I imagine there are politicians in Guernsey in favour of it. But we, like I say, we need to fight for the exemption. If it's coming in, we need to get exemptions for certain.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, on that highly depressing note, can I say thank you very much for sparing me time. I thoroughly enjoyed having a chat with you, and hope to speak to you again some later stage as to how the actual land use plan goes through. So many thanks, Kevin.
You're welcome, Tony. Thank you very much.